In this week's pod, we were joined by Adam Boddison to discuss the pros and the cons of the professional institutions and associations. Professor Adam Boddison, he's a professor, joined APM Association for Project Management as CEO in 2021. Prior to this, Adam held multiple executive leadership roles, including more than a decade at the University of Warwick and 6 years as CEO of the National Association for Special Educational Needs.
Beyond APM, Adam has a portfolio of consultancy and volunteering supporting organizations and initiatives that benefit society. Adam is a visiting professor at the University of Leicester School of Business and Stranmillis University College in Belfast. He has authored several books and is a qualified clinical hypnotherapist. In 2022, Adam was awarded the OBE for services to children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. He certainly has an amazing CV, if we can call it that, and Adam had a lot of passion about the project profession, which is great, as he's the CEO of the APM. And we went all over the show. We asked one or two, I guess, challenging questions from a lot of listeners and professionals that we've spoken to, points of view, and Adam answered them admirably. So what are some of the ones that stood out for you, Martin?
Yeah, it's interesting having someone who's not from traditionally from the project management profession. He's relatively new to it. You can see his background. It's an amazing journey so far. Yeah, I quite like the discussion around some of the negative stereotypes around project management and some of the ways it's been reinforced in the media. We had quite an interesting debate about AI. Actually, going to get a reference in the next body of knowledge, which is really interesting. How about you, Val? What were your main takeaways from this show?
I didn't really have any, but I think I just like his attitude towards bringing the organizations together, and the highlight that the kind of project management career prospect has some PR and identity management to do from a media perspective, particularly mentioning kind of the negative connotations of projects always doing bad, but not kind of bringing or celebrating the point that it does a lot of good too. And without projects, right, we would be in a horrible position. So it is good to see that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Very sharp, very fast guy.
Look, folks, we're not going to spoil it all for you. We'll leave it there. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And we've got a full house, Dale and Martin. Great to see you guys. How you going?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Val. Good to be back. I think we've had a bit of the UK or the Northern Hemisphere, a bit of a summer break between a couple of episodes. But it's good to be back on the airwaves and good to see you. Martin, have you missed Val?
No, it's been a while though. But yeah, good to be back.
Well, you will. I'm coming over to see you soon, Martin. Give you a big hug. We'll be over in November. Big shout out to the PMO conference on the 12th and the 13th of November, where Dale and I will be talking crap for a bunch of people at the PMO conference. Looking forward to that. But let's get our guest. Thanks, Martin. Let's get our guest in. Adam, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's our pleasure. I mean, obviously we've had a few people on, but no one of your esteem around institutions, I think, and we would love to get into the topic because I think education is a big part of where this industry is going and what it needs, right? But Adam, give us a bit of a background, mate. How did you get into this? Where did you start your journey on project management?
Well, it depends how you count it. In terms of my official entry to the project profession, I suppose it was 3 years ago when I joined APM, Association for Project Management, as their chief executive. But really, the reason I ended up coming into this was because I've got a background in professional bodies, in education, in qualifications, in standards, and diversity and inclusion, and so on, all of which are very important for the profession and for APM. And in my previous role, I was doing something which was very specialist and I actively looked for something which was going to have breadth, but also kind of impact on society. They were the two things that were important. And I have to say, the project profession caught me by surprise. That wasn't what I was looking for, but what a great move it was. It's such a brilliant profession to be in. I think it's probably the most misunderstood profession of all of the professions that are out there, because people think it's something that actually isn't. And I think I was in that boat, by the way, before. So you could count it as 3 years ago in terms of getting into the profession. That said, I started my career out as a maths teacher, and 25 years ago, I was teaching critical path analysis to 17-year-olds, right? But I had no idea that that was going to be of any use to me at all, 25 years down the line, that might be something that actually added value to the role I'm doing now. So I suppose it depends how you count it, Val.
I'm not going to lie, you actually look a little bit like my maths teacher from high school. Legit.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not. I don't know. I'll think about that one.
Mr. Bennett, he was a super smart dude. He was a great guy. You just mentioned definitions, and we couldn't pass that up without asking. What's your definition of project management?
Well, if we're talking about the official kind of APM definition, we go along the lines of something like project management being the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge, and experience to achieve specific project objectives according to the project acceptance criteria, which also has a definition, by the way, within agreed parameters. And then we also make the point that it must have final deliverables that are constrained to a finite timescale and budget. How about that for a definition?
That's awesome. It's like you memorized that from somewhere.
Look, well, do you know, when I took the job on at APM, mindful that I wasn't a project professional by trade, one of the things I committed to in my interview, no less, was that I would do the APM qualifications. So having done the project fundamentals qualification, the project management qualification, I now have these definitions ingrained in my mind. So it's like being back in the exam question again, right?
It can feel like that, can't it? But it's the reason I ask, Adam, is if you asked different people, and I think we have Dale and Martin, what is the definition of a project manager? You would get probably a different answer almost every time. And one of the things I think we struggle with in project, at least the project management kind of industry or the career discipline, is consistency. It's an interesting take. I find project management is quite unique in its endeavor because it's not the same for every project, right? Every project is slightly different. You can call yourself a project manager, but that's kind of an agnostic term because you're doing slightly different things on each project. Depends how deep you are in the trenches, I guess. How do we kind of bring project management together in terms of not just nationally, but globally in projects? It's a very open debate kind of conversation. I don't have the answer to this. I'm just curious on your point of view.
Yeah. To be honest, I think we probably get too hung up on definitions and the preciseness. I meet a whole range of people in this job, and I'm at one end of the spectrum. I meet the people who care about benefits and getting the job done and delivering the impact that projects, that we all care about, that benefit society. And at the other end, there are people who are so bogged down in the detail of a precise definition of a definition of a definition that they kind of, in my view, kind of miss the point. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not the most important thing. And the irony is, I very rarely talk about project managers or project management. I talk about project professionals and the project profession because there is a breadth to this profession of which project management is one strand. We talk about project sponsorship, project controls. You mentioned PMO earlier on. There are all of these elements, and in some ways, it's kind of the blessing and the curse of the brand name APM, Association for Project Management. It's called that, but actually, when you kind of dig beneath the surface, it's much broader than that. And the organizer, the people in the profession that we represent are much broader than just project management.
Yeah, let's get into that because obviously you represent a particular organization that is doing its bit or is the organization, right, in terms of chartership. The challenge we have, and I'm from across the pond, so I'm in Australia, and your footprint isn't really well received over here. I don't know why. Maybe it's because you're English, but there isn't quite the community you're talking about in terms of project professionals. I feel like we kind of miss out on that genuine interaction with a community of professionals. What is the APM's kind of mission from your perspective, Adam?
Yeah. So kind of our vision is to have a world in which all projects succeed. It's quite interesting. I get challenged on that vision quite a lot. People say, come on, is that realistic to have a world in which all projects succeed? Because, part of the thing that we treasure in the project profession is that we're going to learn the lessons when projects go wrong and apply those lessons to future projects and so on. So why have a vision that said, a world in which all projects succeed? And my answer to that is usually, look, I used to run a children's safeguarding charity, and their vision was to have a world in which all children are safe. Now, they knew full well that that's a complete impossibility to have a world in which all children are safe. But imagine if they said, you know what, let's be more realistic. Let's have our vision as a world in which 95% of children are safe. They'd be laughed out of town, right? That would be a nonsense. And I think the same is true in our profession. A vision should be visionary. And even if we know we're never going to get to a world in which every single project is successful, that doesn't mean we should try and try. So we should aim to try. So that's the vision. On the mission side of things, that's more about inspiration. It's about inspiring communities to deliver meaningful change for societal benefit. And that's really important to us because we're also a registered charity. And how do we do that? It's by advancing the art, science, theory and practice of project management.
I feel like you've done this before, Adam, and I'm not trying to catch you out. I'm actually genuinely interested because we would love to bring the APM to Australia, Adam. So if there is a way to collaborate on that, let me know. Because I think, go.
Sorry, shall I say something about, because that's probably the bit of your question that I kind of didn't answer there, which was about the links with Australia and the kind of the global footprint. APM is 52 years old now. Originally, it was called Internet UK before a more famous internet came along, and we had to change our name. So we've not always been called Association for Project Management, right? But we became Association for Project Management, but we were largely a UK-focused organisation. And until about probably 5 years ago, I'd say that was true for the vast majority of our history. What changed, though, of course, was partly the pandemic. So that's kind of, forced everybody to rethink, who their core audiences are and where we operate. And in an ironic way, the kind of shift to greater confidence of people using technology and online communication and so on. It's actually made globalization and internationalization much simpler. So I think that's one shift. But the second thing is we work with 500 odd corporate partners, many of whom are actually multinational organizations. So, if I think of organizations like BAE Systems, like Shell or BP, like Siemens, these types of organizations, what does it mean to say, I'm just going to work with the UK bit of, Shell or something like that? It doesn't mean anything because these people are moving around all the time. So actually, in a way, we were kind of already developing that international footprint, but not in a deliberate way. And what's changed in the last few years is we've quite deliberately started to look at how do we develop that community that we've got in the UK in other parts of the world. And of course, you can't go everywhere at once. So we're focused in particular areas at the moment, the Middle East being one. We also have had a Hong Kong branch for a number of years. But when it comes to Australia, we work with other organisations, the AIPM you'll be familiar with. We have bilateral relations with them. And actually, the PMI, the Project Management Institute, we also have good relations with them. I know that's not always been the case in the past. Maybe you'll want to ask me about that. But we do now. And I have a bit of an expression that I use when I talk about these kinds of partnerships, which is, we may be multiple professional bodies, but we represent one profession. And as long as you have that kind of uppermost in your mind, I think a lot of the, kind of personality differences, if I call them that, can easily be swept aside and we can do what's right for the profession.
That's very mature of you. I'm not that mature, Adam. So I often have debates with the president of PMI on LinkedIn. Not that I want to. I just think it's good to have discourse. You know what I mean? And I think it's good. And part of the reason we have the podcast, and I'm sure you've been on plenty yourself, is to just, air it out. Wave the dirty laundry and have a conversation about what actually does work. Because it all sounds good when it comes out. When you build these organizations and you work bilaterally, but not everyone has the same agenda. And this probably brings me into my conversation or questions around, the pros and cons. If we talk about multiple organizations, one of the things that a lot of the young guys ask me is, or young girls, if you like, is which organization will give me the best kind of career development within the project professional environment, which is a very hard conversation because you probably say, Adam, it depends, right? And it's
That's
not
exactly
like
what I would say. Yeah.
it's not like accounting where it's pretty straight. It's a very linear type approach. Being a lawyer, very very other different career development plans and roadmaps are very straight. Whereas project management, which is one of the reasons I love it, is it kind of has a few different wire streams, and you can kind of go left or right or up or down. What's your advice to people who are thinking about becoming part of organizations to help them with their careers? Where should they start, Adam?
Yeah. So I think there's two things that come immediately to mind. So one you kind of touched on before, which is the professional body that has the best footprint in your particular geography. So, if you were in the UK, I'd absolutely be pushing the APM. If you were in Australia, of course, I'd advocate for the APM, but is that the best starting point for you? It might be the best end point, because I always argue that all roads should lead to chartership. Of course, I'd argue that. But is it the best starting point for you? Maybe not. Maybe there's a better association. It could be AIPM, it could be IPMA, it could be PMI. There's lots of different organizations. So I think that's the first thing I'd say is look at the geographies, look at where there is already an established, vibrant community that you can become part of. The second thing I would say is whichever professional body you use, it's a bit like a bank account with no overdraft facility. You're only going to be able to get out what you put in, right? And I see a lot of people who join professional bodies and then go, right, they almost kind of put their hands up and say, right, I'm waiting for it to come now. I'm waiting for the magic to happen. It's not going to work like that. You've got to engage, whether that's through things like the special interest networks and things like that, whether it's through going to events, whether it's through mentoring. It doesn't really matter what it is. You'll pick what's right for you. But you can't just kind of pay your money, if you like, and then go, oh, right, it's just going to happen by magic. You have to be proactive and engaged with that professional body.
Yeah, it's an interesting one if I jump in there, Adam, around engagement, because I guess people expect it to, what you've paid your membership and now what am I getting, right? That's like, it's a transaction where I think if we shift our minds from a transactional, I'm paying for something, to actually going, if you were part of a club, a sports club, you'd still pay membership fees, but you'd actually play sports, or you'd go to the clubhouse, or you'd go and support, you'd be actively involved. You wouldn't just pay your local cricket, rugby, football club, squash club, whatever you play, and then just not go and not be involved, right? That would be a waste of money.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah, and I think we need to shift our mindset. If we want to build communities, then we need to start thinking like communities as well, rather than transactional. But the interesting thing for me is that although there are a lot of people that are confused around, what necessarily or where to necessarily start, and I think you gave some great advice there in terms of looking at location, what works for you. I think a big part of being part of any organization, association, or institute is the network that it provides. And there are plenty of networks. I mean, as you said, you were originally called Internet UK, so it's in the original title. So I think that's a big part of it from my perspective, personally. I guess, what are some of the things that, and this is, I guess, your little bit of a chance to sell the APM, if you will. What are the differentiators between the APM and the PMI, other than geography? The other ones, the AACEs, the ACOSTEs, all the different ones in your mind that go, okay, these are the particular things that we offer that no one else offers.
Yeah, really good question. So I think there's a lot of commonality when it comes to things like qualifications, knowledge, skills. There might be variations in terms of the precise definitions, as we talked about earlier on. I don't worry too much about that, because I think actually that all adds value to the kind of rich tapestry that is the profession. I think where APM really it has something different, though, is when it comes to that chartered standard, because that chartered standard is about competence. So it's not just about saying, look, I can answer the exam question and I know what all these definitions are and I've read the book and I can regurgitate the book. It's about saying, have I applied that in practice? Not only have I applied that and it's worked, and so I am actually competent to practice, almost that license to practice. And it's quite interesting. The project profession, unlike many other professions, is not a regulated profession. Right. So it's not like, if I'm an architect or, an engineer or an accountant, you have to have that chartership or other standards, and I draw this distinction here between qualifications and standards. You see, you have to meet certain standards to be able to practice. We don't have that in the project profession, but I think we are kind of semi-regulated. And the reason I say that is because there's the license to practice in terms of you are competent as a project professional, and that's what Charter gives you. And then there is the sector that you are operating in, which may well be a regulated sector, like finance, like pharmaceuticals, and so on. So you end up with this kind of cross section of regulation, if you like, this crossover of regulation, which I think actually puts project professionals in a really interesting situation, because they're able to, if you like, cross-pollinate between sectors in a way that very few other professionals can. I mean, think about it like this. The CEO of an organization is one of the few roles that spans every function in an organization. And I think project professionals are one of the others that really do that. So in my mind, that means you've got a whole group of people who are born leaders, right? I mean, they're kind of they kind of got that experience that most people who've come through a functional route really struggle with, because they say, well, you can see the interview question now. Okay, you're the accountants, but how do I know that you can do all of these other things or take responsibility for all these other functions? Your project professionals got that. But how do they demonstrate they're competent? It's the chartership. For me, that's the thing. The second thing I would say that really differentiates APM is the charitable aspect of it. We exist for the public good. So we have this strapline that we use, because when projects succeed, society benefits. I believe strongly when I talk to people about the work that they do, they're not overly in it because they really care about the process. I mean, there are a few of those people, but mostly the people are in it because they care about the outcome, the benefits that's going to be delivered to society. So really kind of challenging the status quo where it makes a difference, setting those really high standards means that we can actually help the project profession to deliver better for society. And that's what we're all about.
Now, that's awesome. And, I'd no doubt you succinctly, what the differentiators are and what the advantages are of the APM. I'm going to give you a role to play. If you were the CEO of PMI, I think it's Pierre Leman, and he heard what you just said, what would you say if you were him in response to that?
I'd say I absolutely agree with everything that Adam's just said. No, look. In all seriousness, and this is absolutely true. When I started the job on day one, I don't think there's any great secrets I'm giving away here. But when I started the job on day one at APM, one of the documents I had on my desk to have a look at was some of the difficult court cases, from PMI and APM over chartership, many years before I started, right? So it's kind of before my time. Most of the people that were involved in that from all sides are not around anymore. And actually, one of the first phone calls I made on that day was to the then acting CEO of PMI, since moved on, to say, look, this doesn't make sense. We're one profession. Why can't we work together? Why can't we have the PMP as a recognised assessment for chartership? Because the PMI had no intention of setting up an equivalent to chartership, because actually having a competence-based standard in the States is problematic for all kinds of reasons, not least the kind of litigation risks. If you're saying that someone's competent and then they're not, that can be challenging. So so they were never going to develop something themselves. So why not work with us? And actually, I found the PMI quite amenable to that, as were my team. So then it's about how do we do it? What's the mechanics of that? So I think APM, PMI, IPMA, AIPM, all of these acronyms, they all sound very similar. There's lots of P's and A's and I's in the. I think there is probably a greater sense of cohesion amongst these professional bodies now than there ever has been in the past. Which is
should we have one membership for all of them? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it'd be really hard to do, because one of the things I would say that all professional bodies have is a set of values and a culture, and that is different in different parts of the world. So if I, as an example, one of the values that we have at APM is that we are a warm organization. That's nothing to do with global warming, anything like that. It means that, sometimes we have to do hard things, but actually we're going to do them in a nice way. We're going to treat people decently. That isn't necessarily the approach to running a professional body that every other organization might want to take. Some of them might want to be commercially or corporately more sharp, if you like. So I think there needs to be that room for different approaches. And actually think, as far as project professionals are concerned, that element of choice is an important point in the market, because actually if you just have one professional body, it's a one size fits all. I think very quickly you would see splinter groups setting up because they'd say, well, it doesn't quite work for my particular role, or it doesn't quite fit with the way I would like to think about these things. So I think it's a nice aspiration. I don't think it's very realistic.
Yeah, no, fair points. And let's move on to, I guess, the state of the profession view of the world. Do we have enough people, project managers, to deliver the projects that we have? I mean, you can comment based on the UK, Europe, globally if you want. What's your views on that, and what is the APM doing to ensure that we have enough qualified people and experienced people to deliver these major complex projects that we find ourselves in?
So the short answer is no, we don't have enough people. And that's whether you look at the UK alone. In fact, probably if you look at any country, and certainly globally, I mean, the PMI and APM have both got quite similar figures on this. And it's something of the order of, we need an additional 25 million project professionals globally by 2030. So PMI have published that a few years ago. We've got a similar figure in our Golden Thread report, which was published earlier this year. So I think there's a shortage. The question then is, do we need to find 25 million more people, or do we need to do fewer projects? Or do we just accept that some projects are going to be run by unqualified people? So you've got these different options. I think the problem is that no one's really making a genuine informed choice about that. It's a bit kind of figuring it out as we go along. In terms of what APM's doing about it, we are obviously trying to get more people into the profession. It's about how do you do that? So there are some people who say, actually, what you need to do is get people in school doing project qualifications, almost, at birth, so they're kind of straight into the profession, from when they're born, or certainly advocating for, qualifications in school. I have to say, I'm not convinced that that's a good idea. Two reasons for that. One, if you look at some of the well-established professions, I think of architecture, engineering, accountancy, they don't have those qualifications at that level. They might introduce them, and then there are some there in small numbers, but that's not really the main pipeline for those professions. And that's because they know they've done this before. They know that it will switch off probably more people than it will switch on because of the putting people through that type of formal qualification at that stage. So I'm not an advocate for a qualification, but I am an advocate of raising the profile of the profession in schools and in universities, because I think most children won't be saying, when I grow up, I want to be a project manager or project controls or wherever it is, because they don't know what it is. They've never heard of it. Where do you see it in the media? In fact, we do see it in the media, but it's not good news, right? We have a problem. I think we have an image problem in the profession, right? This trial by media, I call it. When you see projects in the news, it's bad news.
Yeah.
Right? It's always, government IT project overspent, by, billions, or, public money wasted on this, or, this is really late and causing people lots of problems. Where's the good news? So as an example, in the UK, we had a project called it was the electronic prescription service. So if your listeners don't know what I'm on about here, you have a system in the UK where when you go and visit your doctor, if they've got to give you some medicine, they kind of give you a handwritten prescription which you take to your local pharmacy and you exchange it for medicine. That system no longer exists. A government-funded IT project which worked across the private sector and the public sector and many different local IT systems, essentially worked it so that when you go to your doctor, they type something into their computer, it gets automatically sent to a pharmacy of the patient's choice, much more secure system. It was delivered on time, within budget, and literally it probably changed the life of every single person in the UK, directly or indirectly, overnight. And there was not one news story in the press that said, look at this, life-changing project. Not one. That can't be right. But the road closure that's one day too late is front page news in the local. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So we've got to sort this out. And what about The Apprentice? I mean, that's a disaster. Every week on The Apprentice, that program where they say, "Oh, you can be the project manager this week," and then of course it's a disaster, and they sack them at the end of the program. The person didn't have any qualifications. I think I know what might be going wrong there. It gives this impression, doesn't it, that anybody can do the job. And sometimes people say that to me, right? Oh, yeah, but, isn't everything a project? Everybody can do projects like, I don't know, planning your holidays a project. And I suppose it is. But then I say to them this, everybody can dance, but not everybody's a dancer. Right? There's a difference between being able to do something and being able to do it professionally to a high standard. And that's what professional bodies are all about professionalizing what project professionals do so that actually we can really deliver for society. And that's the step change we've got to make. And the media have really got to get on board with this.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's if you're at a dinner party, right? And there's a doctor there and someone asks, what do you do? The doctor, I'm a doctor. Whereas if you're a project manager, I'm a project manager. You kind of shy away from it. Why do you do that? And we shouldn't, right? We should celebrate the things we do, which is quite. Sorry, did you want to jump in there?
Well, I was just going to say, Dale, I'm not even sure they would say they're a project manager. So this is the other bit which I think we have got control of. And I would ask any project professionals listening to this just to think about what I'm about to say and to reflect whether they do this or not. So when I started this job, I used to meet lots of project professionals. So I know the project professionals already, right? And I say to them, oh, what do you do? And very, very rarely would someone say to me, I'm a project manager and I work for the NHS, or I'm a project manager and I work in energy or something like that. They tell me the sector they work in before they tell me their job. So when I meet people, they say, oh, I work in the nuclear sector and I deliver projects, or I work in, professional services and I deliver projects. That doesn't happen in other professions. Like you said before, people will say, I'm a doctor, I'm an accountant, and then they'll tell you where they do that job. So there's something about the maturity of the profession here, which says that people identify with their sector before they identify with their profession. And that's something we've got to change. And that's something that's not down to media. And, I'm pointing the finger at some of these other people. That is down to us, practicing project professionals. We can start being loud and proud about what we do and say, yeah, I am a project manager. Let me tell you about it, because you might not know much about this profession. And I started off at the beginning saying this is one of the most misunderstood professions, I think, in the world, if not the most misunderstood profession, because people think it's admin, Gantt charts, telling leaders what to do. It's just, they just don't really know what it is. They think it's a bit like marketing, right? It's where marketing was 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, the marketers were in the back room designing posters and radio adverts and whatever else. Now they're driving strategy in the boardroom, right? Chief marketing officers running organizations, making the big decisions. This is the trajectory that the project profession is on. So now you've got chief project officers driving strategy in the boardroom because businesses are delivering change all the time and they've got it. But some organizations have still got their project professionals in the back room taking the instructions and doing the Gantt charts. And that is where it's a largely misunderstood profession. We've got to sort that out because that's not right.
Yeah, no, I hear the passion. It's great. And I think the listeners can feed off that as well. When you were mentioning, that most project managers prefer to mention their sector over their profession, it actually reminded me of English football, where it's club over country, but we won't go into that. I know Val particularly wants to jump in on this, so I'm going to bring you back in here, Val, because I think there's a few things that have piqued your interest.
That's great. I've just been thinking about there is something around the way we have a PR problem and an identity problem, and media do play a part. There's institutions out there, and specifically people who write papers that publish how bad projects are. I wanted to get your view on the people like Bent Flivberg, who academically can point out that every project is wrong and overspent. And, for a long time, we've asked him to come on the show and he's not accepted. So this is a ploy to get him on. But it's also, really demoralizing for project professionals who, I'm sure, even on the big projects that do run over budget, there's a lot of hard work that goes into those. For anyone who knows, who's worked on a project that's big, there's more than one factor. They're the kind of, I guess we need some type of counter argument that showcases the good stories. How do we do that, Adam? How do we unstitch a mega project? Because you mentioned before, maybe we need to do less projects, and maybe that's a good idea, but sometimes we can't. And I think a lot of the West, we're kind of, I guess we're reliant on government projects to kind of fund job creation and various other things for the economic climate that we're in. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, let's first of all tackle the kind of research and the stats kind of negative, view of the profession. So you mentioned Ben Fallupia there. So his figure is that 0.5% of projects are successful. By the way, if you look at the data that underpins that, you'll see a vast majority of those are IT projects. So not that I want to point the finger at those working in IT, but
no.
but the thing is that figure is, it's often quoted as if it applies to all projects, and I don't think that's necessarily true. And I'm not pointing a finger at Bent there, by the way. I think it's how people are using the figure. I could quote other figures. Antonio Nieto Rodriguez talks about 35% of projects are successful. There are others that have more complex stats, like 2.5% of companies successfully complete 100% of their projects. Well, that's a double percentage one for your readers to think about. PwC has data, and they say, well, actually, it's 30%. I mean, the reality is, whichever figure you look at, none of the figures are that great, right? But there is one problem I have with all of the figures, and that is, what do we mean by project success? And I'm not convinced we actually have a common understanding of what we mean. There are loads of definitions out there, right? We could probably get bogged down in a big conversation about that. But some of them are, a project is successful if it completes, if it delivers the outcomes on time, within budget to the required specification, kind of iron triangle stuff. Yeah, fine. Some have, it's got to do that within plus or minus a certain percentage. Okay, so that's another variation. Some say, actually, we don't care about outcomes. We only care about benefits. If the project delivers the benefits, it's successful. It almost doesn't matter if it's overspent. Great example of that, the Channel Tunnel, by the way, late, over budget. You ask a person on the street now, what do you think about the Channel Tunnel? Was it a successful project? Oh, yeah. And by the way, that's also a project that delivered unintended benefits. It was set up to transport people essentially to and from France and England, between France and England. But now it transports energy back and forward, which in this, energy security climate that we're in now is pretty challenging. That was never in the original business case. So how do you really know if a project is successful? And also, do you know at the end of a project, or do you need to wait, particularly for these bigger projects, you're talking about the mega projects, do you need to wait even 10 years, more than that, to really take the long view back and then say, actually, that we got that right. That was a project that really has made a difference and impacted society in a positive way. Because sometimes you don't know. They've got a great expression in the Netherlands. I love this expression, where they talk about a project that delivers all of the outcomes. So it's on time, within budget to the required specification, but delivers no benefits at all because maybe the business environment has changed and it's just not needed anymore. You can imagine that in an IT context, right? And the expression they say is, it's a medical expression, right? They say the operation was successful, the patient is dead. So you get the idea. So I with all of these figures, I think you do have to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt, because I think we're not comparing like with like, and the people reading it, what they think about success means, and probably what the person who wrote it meant, they're probably not on the same page, as I would guess.
100%. I think I agree with you, and particularly infrastructure projects that, the benefits are usually for the community, right? They're for population growth, they're to help build cities and connect rural areas and all that kind of stuff. And all of us on the call have been on those infrastructure projects, and the benefits do take time, right? And for the UK, it's the Crossrails, it's the big kind of rail infrastructure. They'll take time, but there's naturally a benefit to that. And I do think there's a challenge conflating those projects with IT projects. And the reason why is because software is a lot more unpredictable than infrastructure. And the benefits can change over time. As you said, it can become redundant relatively quickly because software changes almost it feels like almost every week now. But it's a fast-paced environment where redundancy is kind of built into it. There's this obsolescence management that you need to think about when you build a software, right? For example, if it takes you 3 years to build it, likelihood is it's going to be out of date. At some point, you're going to have to implement some changes. So by the time you get to the end, you have no iron triangle to hang off of. So take that, Bent.
Yeah.
We look forward to having you on the show, Adam.
Well, I go slightly further than that. If I think about public sector projects, so these are the government funded ones you talked about. The other issue you have with these, of course, is they have multiple project leads over the lifespan of a project. So we call them SROs here, senior responsible officers or senior responsible owners. So over the course of a 20-year project, there might be 8 different project leaders, maybe more. And what happens quite often is that someone will come in and they'll look at the business case, they'll look at the kind of RAG rating, of how everything's going. There'll be lots of reds on there, and they'll say, actually the environment's changed. I'm not sure that original business case is still valid. So then they do this thing, they call it rebaselining the project, right? So now they change what the success criteria are in the business case, which sometimes is a valid thing, by the way. So I'm not saying it's not a valid thing. And now everything's green, right? We're now on track because all where we are now fits with the business case. You imagine that happening 8 times across the course of a 20-year project. So you get to the end and you say you've delivered all of the outcomes that were intended, but none of those were outcomes that were in the original business case. How do you then judge whether that was successful? Because some people say success is about did it live up to the original business case? But that changes, particularly in these long-term projects. It's not going to stay the same.
No, I completely agree. Let's get Machine Gun Martin, or Marty McFly, as I call him, for a question. Marty, what do you think?
Yeah, a really, really interesting discussion so far. I think if we go back to the theme of major infrastructure projects, so we can debate what the percentage is of successful projects, but I think we can all generally agree we're probably not great at delivering major infrastructure projects, and the reasons for project failure haven't fundamentally changed for years. Some would argue decades. Maybe the order has changed a little bit. So I suppose my question is, what is the APM and other associations doing to really infiltrate these projects? Because we don't have enough project professionals, but we do have some really good people working on it. The guys with the IPM A-level A. We got some excellent academics within the industry, but we're still making the same mistakes when delivering those projects. So what is the APM doing on those major projects, and what can it or will it be doing in the next few years?
Yeah, and I would also add chartered project professionals to your list there as well. And that's one of the big things that we are doing, is making sure that there are more chartered project professionals, in other words, competent people that we can have on these projects. Because I think the more people that you have who are qualified, who meet those standards, the more likely you are to be successful on these projects. And we have data that supports that. But in terms of the bigger question, which is how do we get under the skin, I think you're asking about, of some of these major projects. So one of the big untapped ways of approaching this is around the data, around the AI. I've listened to some of your previous guests that you've had on this podcast talking about the kind of data and AI. I don't think we're leveraging that enough. And I think APM's as guilty of this as the other professional bodies. We're using data and AI for products and services to help people kind of deliver projects. And that's all well and good. What we've been less good at is saying, we're all working with all of these different corporates, different governments and so on. Are we being bold enough in terms of gathering that data? Even if we just take something like lessons learned data. If we were to gather all of the lessons learned data that we've got across all of the professional bodies and all of the corporates that we work with, and we put it into a big data lake, is that the terminology we use now, and use that to inform things like our risk registers and our plans. Actually, would that improve the success rates of some of these mega projects? I don't know the answer, but we haven't tried it. But why? So then the question is, well, why aren't we doing that? Why isn't that type of thing happening? And I think some of it is because we still live in a world which is more driven by the commercial competition side of things than it is around the collaboration. And by the way, for me, this is one of the big plus points for professional bodies, because they try to not make the commercials disappear, because that is obviously important, but we try to kind of promote this argument of a rising tide lifts all ships, that actually there is some overall benefit. It's almost, I call it the food court argument, right? So if you imagine your food court and you've got all these restaurants kind of competing against each other, but they decide that it's in their interests to all be in the same food court because that's the place you go for food, and they all benefit. I think there's a similar argument to be made around data. But actually trying to make that argument to many other organizations in the C-suite is really hard. And of course, no one wants to be the first one to do it, right? I don't want to give up my competitive advantage first. It's one of these where everybody has to go at the same time and no one goes. And I think we're in the no one goes camp at the moment. And that's the problem.
Yeah, interesting point there. I'm about to ask a follow-up question about what the APM is doing. Is AI going to get a mention in the next body of knowledge? But it's something that is being worked on.
I can ask you about that. Sorry, I can talk to you about that if you want. So obviously it won't be published until early 2025. But yes, AI is definitely going to feature in there explicitly. And the approach we've taken to thinking about that content has been very collaborative and it's co-produced. So it's not going to be a kind of done to or done for the profession. It's very much done with the profession. So I don't think anything that appears in there is going to be problematic. The biggest challenge actually around including that type of content is that something like the body of knowledge, and this is true of all of the bodies of knowledge that are out there, is they don't come out that often, right? So, ours comes out roughly once every 5 years. Val made the point earlier on, tech's moving really fast. AI is moving particularly fast. Whatever we publish in early 2025, is it still going to be valid in 2026? Definitely probably not by 2027. So we have this interesting problem as a professional body, which is you don't want to be publishing so many iterations of the body of knowledge that actually the sector can't keep up and it doesn't become the proper stable reference point that it's intended to be. But equally, if you don't publish them often enough, it becomes out of date in certain parts very quickly. So how do we kind of square the circle with it? I don't know the answer, by the way. So but that is the problem, and I don't think it's a unique problem to APM. I think it's right across the other professional bodies in this profession, but in other professions as well. It's the same. AI is affecting all the professions in the same way.
Oh, it's such a fast-moving subject. It's really hard to keep up at times. Just one more before I hand back to Dale. Kind of linked to the previous question around almost things like project governance and learning lessons on major projects. Can associations like the APM and some of the other ones work with other government organisations like the National Audit Office to really support and give that assurance on major projects? So I saw some really good reports that you did after the Crossrail project as a kind of joint report, which was really interesting. Is there any plans to be doing kind of working alongside those bodies to give that extra support and benefit of their experience?
We do already. So if you look at 23rd of July this year, the National Audit Office published 9 reports all on the same day. The reason they were all on the same day, by the way, is because we had a general election, right? So there were lots of reports that kind of couldn't be published during the kind of the PERDA period, as we call it here, that kind of pre-election period. So they all kind of just got dumped, if you like, on the website all in one go. It feels slightly disrespectful to say that about those reports, because actually the reports themselves are very, very good quality. But if you look at those reports, so one of them's about HS2, for example, one of them's around the National Health Service. If you look at those reports and you look at the contributors and the sources for those, you'll see that APM is referenced in there. We meet regularly with the National Audit Office, not just in the UK, but in other governments as well. We try to, where we can, influence the focus of some of those things. And we also try and get our members involved and corporates involved where they have expertise. So, that we have within our membership people who are probably world leading in their expertise in particular aspects of project delivery. And so having those people as a reference point for organizations like the NAO to say, what your thoughts on this is actually something we do in terms of providing that type of input. So the answer is we already do it. What we don't do is, and we wouldn't be allowed to do this anyway, is say, let's put a big APM logo on the front of this government report, because it's not our report, right? We're just a contributor in the way that NAO and others would contribute, would consult lots of organisations and lots of individuals.
I think all organizations should put their logos on. It'd be great to show the community collaborating together, that it's not a government thing, that it's actually done by industry and associations, and everyone's getting involved.
I think there are some, particularly in the UK at least, I think there are some rules around branding of government published documents, which is why that doesn't happen. So I don't think this is any part of government saying they don't want that to happen. I think they're quite proud of those links and relationships. But I think there are some rules around, if it's a government published document, then there are certainly guidelines about what's allowed to be on there and what's not.
Yeah, well, here's the food court, but you're not allowed to put a sign up outside your stall on what you're selling. But on that analogy, I think it's great. But I think the word of caution in the food court analogy is that not all food is healthy for you. So if we are pulling lots of data together from different organizations, we need to be aware of what is healthy data and what may not be healthy data. But coming back to it, I think one of the things that we've been talking about this probably goes back to about 2 years ago, Adam, where we had a few different people on, and predominantly we're talking around project controls. And the APM has always been more project management focused. And I guess in the UK, the most recognized association is the ACOSD, and then the AAC is also one. I know they're big in the US as well. But quite recently, the APM sort of picked up project controls as a focus as well. What's the lens you're looking at project controls through, and how does this potentially overlap or support what the ACOSDs and the AACs are doing?
Yeah, well, I think I'd challenge the premise of the question, really. So on two points, I would say that APM has always had project controls included within its brief. We haven't maybe called it that, so sometimes we've called it planning, monitoring, and control and things like this. So we might have used the words project controls, but it's certainly always been a part of what we do, and it represents that rich tapestry of the project profession that I talked about earlier on. And I think some of the organisations that you've just talked about there, I'd say some of those are newer to the party when it comes to project controls than we are. So I would challenge the basis of the question. But in terms of the latter part of your question, what's the lens that we're looking at this through? So one of the things that we have as part of our strategy as APM is that we want to be the professional body for all project professionals. And when I say all, that includes those working in project controls. What we have been probably less good at, I would say, is actually packaging the content that we have for those who work in project controls up in a very easy to find and easy to access way, because there are different ways of looking at things, and that's the big change we're making now, is we're trying to make that much simpler. A great example of that, by the way, is if I think about the chartered standard. One of the bits of feedback I got earlier on was, Adam, if I'm a director of project controls, I'm finding it really difficult to demonstrate that I meet the competencies in the chartered standard, because they don't necessarily lend themselves to project controls because of the balance of mandatory and optional competencies. So actually, we changed that, and that's been that change has been in place now for a good year, if not 18 months, and we've had people who from all levels of project controls who've gone through that and not just have gone through and been successful, but have gone through and said, actually, that's really added value to the way in which I actually do my job, and it's actually being recognised by my organisation. And there are plenty of testimonials on the APM website of project controls experts who would recommend chartership and recommend the resources and support and communities that we have at APM. And of course, we have the PMC special interest group, which is the Planning, Monitoring and Control interest network, which if any of your listeners are in project controls, they should be definitely part of that. And if they're not an APM member to get access to that, then why not? They should be. They should be signing up for this straight away.
Absolutely. We can maybe get a special discount for you through this episode. But that's interesting.
They were your words, not mine. I don't want to be getting in trouble with my finance people back at base.
Great. Love the disclaimer there, Adam. So I think, yeah, it's interesting. It's good that you clarify that, because I wouldn't be the only one that posed that question, because that might go down then to marketing and branding, that there's this idea that the APM is for project managers, and that there's the ACOST or the AAC for project controls professionals. And so it's good that we actually air that question, I think, for listeners to clarify that. I want to pick up on the AI piece as well, because I do get that, and understand that publishing content and bodies of knowledge does take time, but also you can't constantly update it because people can't keep up with it. Might AI actually help you keep up with this? And maybe it's not having to publish it as such in written form, where it's electronic and then you can keep it up to date, would be my first question on that. And then the second one was around AI, the AI skill set for project managers. How do you see, what skills do you think project managers or project professionals should have when it comes to AI skills?
Yeah. So I think on the kind of body of knowledge point, I think the issue is less about, whether it's in electronic copy or hard copy and so on. I think the issue is that we have organizations that will, for example, peg the way they assess their organizational maturity to things like the body of knowledge. They will put their learning development programs linked to the body of knowledge and so on. So if you start changing that kind of frequently, and we're talking about large multinational organizations, multi-billions, then you start changing that too often, and it makes it difficult for them to actually align to your body of knowledge and actually to meet those standards, because there's a lot that when we change that it has a knock-on implication, if you like, in some of these big organizations. So I think
sorry to jump in there.
Yeah.
Is that perhaps one of the challenges on why we're slow to evolve as a profession, because we're not changing, keeping up to date with the content as often as we should be?
I think that's probably a fair point. But equally, I think about professional bodies in general. Professional bodies aren't known as being fast-moving organizations. And you could criticize professional bodies for that, particularly if you're working in, with the corporate world where it's, much faster paced. But actually, in a world of chaos and constant change, professional bodies are often seen as a kind of bastion of stability. So I think time will tell whether that kind of stability ends up being the demise of the concept of a professional body in general terms, or whether it actually becomes the kind of the reset point. So once we've run off really quickly in a particular direction, it doesn't work. How do we get back to basics? Let's get back to our professional body, and we can use that as the kind of baseline to build from again. I don't quite know which of those two it's going to be, but it's going to be one of them, right? So let's see.
Yeah.
On the kind of broader AI point and skills, I take the view on this that what we don't need is project professionals to become data analysts. We don't need project professionals to become AI experts, but they do need to be data literate and AI literate. And then it's about articulating, well, what does that mean? And actually, I don't think there is a one size fits all here, which brings challenges, by the way, for things like, the body of knowledge. Because if I'm, in a risk management role, the kind of AI skills I might need, the AI competence I might need, might be completely different than if I'm in a sponsorship role or if I'm in a PMO role and so on. So I think it needs to be done by role. So we have kind of a guide, for example, developing project data analytics skills guide. And in there, we've actually developed 5 different personas, which to kind of represent the different types of role that people might be in. We could have easily put 50 in there, right? But you've got to kind of keep it accessible. So we put 5 in there, and for each of those 5, we've tried to articulate what kind of skills might be needed. And a whole point of that is it's not that it's a definitive, these are the skills if you're in this role, but it's a starting point. So people can assess themselves against that and say, actually, do I have that set of skills, or do I have any gaps? And if I've got them all and I'm still not quite where I am, then maybe I need to be getting into some more advanced stuff. But it provides a useful baseline and starting point. So I think that's the thing there. But I do think there's a bigger question over AI, though. Because we talked about regulation earlier on. There is a big, global question about whether AI should be regulated or not. But for me, the thing that's going to drive the answer to that question, I don't think is going to be about, governments and national security and all of this kind of stuff. I think it's going to be about water security, right? Because there is a fact, and this was published widely by Sky News and BBC, so I think it's reasonably confident in the efficacy of this fact, the accuracy of this fact, which says that for every 20 to 50 uses of a chat, a chat GPT or a Gemini or something like that, it takes the equivalent of a 500 milliliter bottle of water to cool the data center. So, if you think about that and how this scales, and by the way, it scales even more quickly when quantum computing comes along, goes up in exponentially. That is going to be a massive issue in terms of water security globally. We've already got a water security issue, right? It's going to be, even more of a challenge. So I think you can make the case if someone's using AI to, find the cure for cancer, you can probably make the case that it's worth spending some water on that, right? If I'm using it to write bedtime stories for my 5-year-old, it's probably harder to make the case. And that's where I think the regulation is going to come in. And what I don't know is when that comes in, what impact does that have, if any, on things like the project profession, which is why I think there might be some hesitation, if I call it that, about going too far too quickly in this space, because actually the parameters, I think, are going to change quite soon.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And if we can futurescape a little bit with you, one more from me, and I'll hand back to Val. If not for regulation, and let's say you had a white piece of paper and you know what you know now about technology, data, AI included, and the project profession, what skills to those listening would you say you should really keep and enhance? And what skills do you think AI or technology will do for the project manager in the future?
Yeah, well, the obvious answer, if I kind of put this into groups, is that those kind of process type skills. So things like producing a risk register, it's quite process heavy, and there are other skills which are quite process heavy. They would lend themselves more to kind of to AI and automation. What that does is quite interesting. If I come back to the image problem that the profession has, people think it's all about process. So if we work on the premise that AI kind of takes all of that process bit and does it for us, then what does the profession become? It becomes all about people, which I think it already is, by the way, but people haven't realized it. Because when I talk to people and I say, imagine a project that's gone really, really well, and imagine one that's been a disaster, and tell me what was the defining difference? What was the thing that made it really great or a real disaster? Was it process or was it people? 9 times out of 10, someone says to me, it was people that made the difference. Either it was a rubbish leader, or it was a great leader, or whatever. It was people. So I think it's already there. But the AI, I think, accelerates and amplifies what is already there. And that is what I think we're going to see. So people are already using the tech for this stuff. I think it's just going to be more obvious.
Yeah, it's a good point, Adam. I was thinking about it because we're dipping our toe into the future of the unknowns. And one, it's very exciting. Two, it's daunting as well. As you said, the energy consumption to power even your ChatGPT prompts. There is a carbon trail for everything we do. And when you talked about roles in particular, I find it's good that you mapped personas, because I think that's the that's the way to go, because I think there is going to be a massive interesting shift in roles. I mean, we've had some of that a little bit since the internet, right? Some new roles emerged that were never there before, and probably very difficult to predict that they will be actual paid work roles. And that's really hard, because for a body of knowledge or to standardize that may be difficult, because you don't want to restrict it either. There's kind of this kind of frontier that has to be a little bit manic and agile and explorative and curious, and then that over time that beds down into an actual kind of something you can put benchmarks around. Just curious on your perspective of how AI will play a role in this. I'm kind of leaning down the road that every single person out there who is a professional will have, and I think, Dale, you talked about this on the other podcast, will have some type of agency, artificial agency, that conducts a lot of the transactional pieces of work that project managers do day to day. And if that's the case, then maybe the medium for the body of knowledge is this, I think Microsoft stole the name, but Copilot or assistant that is plugged into what good looks like, what the standards are, what works for those types of projects, historical information, benchmarks, and your personality type. So it knows, like, don't bother Val after 10 o'clock because he's going to be sleeping, you know. So that, but it can provide you information at 6 a.m. because that's when he's waking up for podcasts. So Adam, what's your view on how that's going to go? Just, you know, kind of organization aside, because I think they will meet up at some point, but what's your view on AI being a personal assistant to project managers or professionals?
I think it's already happening. To be honest, I think there are some individuals, some organizations that might resist it, sometimes with good reason, but I think it's already happening. AI is I think it's the 8th GPT, the 8th general purpose technology. I think the first one was Fire, by the way. These general purpose technologies are the ones that everybody ends up using. It affects everybody's life in some way. Actually, I think the wheel was one of them as well. I'm trying to remember what they all were, but there were various different ones. The internet, I think, was probably the most recent one. And now, of course, we have AI. So I think it will affect every person. I had a great story the other day, and it was about, do you remember when you used to go and book your holiday and you go and visit the travel agent and you go to the shop, right? You used to go to the shop and you'd sit down and they'd say, let's have a look at the holidays and so on. And I heard this story and it was talking about these two ladies who ran a kind of private travel agent, and this going back when the internet first came out, and they were at this dinner and they were saying, I hope this internet thing kind of goes away soon because it's really ruining our business and we really enjoy talking to people, and that was just their view. They just saw it as just a fad that was just kind of just an inconvenience, and they just wanted it to go away, and of course didn't go away. And now everybody can book their own holidays and so on. So but there are people like that now who are thinking, oh, this AI thing, it's all a bit of a fad and it'll all die out. It's not. I mean, you mentioned Copilot. At the minute, that's obviously a chargeable service from Microsoft. But we've seen this before, right? It's going to be built in. We know it's going to be built into Office 365 or whatever it's going to be called in a future iteration. And it will be a standard feature which everybody expects to have in there. So it will just be there. It will just be automatic. And I think if we're not getting on the bus with this, we're going to get lost pretty quickly. So yes, I think it will be there. Whether it's used as an assistant or not, I don't know. But the one key thing I would say is this: if AI only gets used to kind of do what we do already, but quicker, then we've lost the plot and we've missed the point. What we've got to do is start using it to be not just predictive, but prescriptive. So to be saying to us, actually, in this project, there's a problem. It's almost like the sat-nav, right? So there's something coming up here. There's an obstacle. You don't want to carry on down this route because there's a problem. You're going to get stuck. You need to be turning left pretty quickly. And if you do that, it's going to help you to avoid this catastrophe, which could be a major delay. That's the real impact that AI could have when it's used properly, I think, in projects.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good response. I think as well as the sat-nav's a perfect example, especially in rural countries like Australia. I still call it a rural country. It has the potential to go wrong based on data points, right? So I've had Google Maps send me the wrong direction a few more than once. And I think there is this call back to your point around regulation. There has to be not just from energy consumption, but just how we train these models, because my only fear is that we become too dependent. If you just look at the iPhone, perfect example of human amalgamation of things that are great. Exactly. And once AI is properly installed, which is not too far, I understand, and we become too dependent on its output, we forget about the inputs. And I'm just curious and concerned that who's left responsible to train these models that are effectively feeding us that prescriptive model of the way of working.
Yeah, I mean, there is an issue. I mean, the next wave of AI will certainly focus on other inputs that are not text inputs. So it'll be video inputs and audio inputs and so on. I think there is an issue, though, around hallucinations. And the best thing, if I think of an easy way of explaining hallucinations, people don't know what I'm talking about. When we first had image generation, so the police used this, for example, they'd taken photos of millions and millions and millions of people. And then when you came in to kind of give a description of the person who's, I don't know, burgled your house, and you said, oh, they had a beard, big ears, cap on, whatever it was, it sounds a lot like you actually, Val. Now I'm thinking about this, but
Exactly.
you come and give your description. You come and give your description of the person who's burgled your house, right? And then they put all of this in, and it generates the image. And what they found in the first kind of software that did this was the images kept coming up with a horizontal line coming through the neck of the person when it was generating the images. And they were like, what is this horizontal line? Why does it keep doing that? And they realized that the images that they'd fed into the system, for the large, for the model that it was drawing from, they often had people standing in front of a horizon. Because lots of people take pictures in front of a horizon. So the AI said, well, lots of these pictures of faces have this horizontal line. That must be a feature of a face. But of course, a human looking at that says, well, that's completely ridiculous. And of course, they then kind of put what we call anti-hallucinogenic workflows in place to kind of deal with that, right? So that's a kind of easy visual one to imagine. But let's put that in a project context. We're putting all of these data points, as you say, into the AI. What are the hallucinations that it's going to have, and who's going to spot it? So this is just coming back to your skills question. I've got probably this might sound counterintuitive, but bear with me on this one. Let's take something like that could be automated completely. So let's say something like I don't know, optimizing a kind of planning schedule. Right, so you can imagine that might be something that the AI might be pretty good at in terms of resource allocation and all of that. If it had a hallucination in there, the only person who would actually be able to see that properly or is the person who is actually really good at doing planning and resource allocation and so on. But imagine if your organization doesn't have that skill set anymore because the AI does it. How are you going to spot the hallucination? So I've got this theory that even though AI might do some of these things better, faster, automated, and all the rest of it, organizations are actually going to need to invest more heavily in the assurance side of those things, and it will cost them more because those skills are far harder to find because there's not so many of those people around anymore.
Wow. It's amazing. I think we could chat to you all day, Adam, about this, but I know it's late for you as well. But before we head, to the end of it, we do have a feature for this podcast. It's called Fiverr, and it's 5 quickfire questions. And for this, we'll hand back to Machine Gun Martin.
Okay, go for it.
Right, sorry, mic issues. Right, 5 quickfire questions. So let's make a start. Number 1, what's your one piece of advice for people who are new to the project management profession?
Join a professional body. Ideally APM.
Perfect. What's the biggest misconception about project management?
That it's only technical and that it's administrative. There are technical aspects of it, but I think it's increasingly strategic, and actually it impacts society probably more so than any other profession.
What's more important, motivation or discipline?
I would always say motivation, because the reality is you can learn discipline. You can't learn motivation. If you haven't got that, then you're off to a dodgy start from the beginning.
Other than your own, what would be your book recommendation to our listeners?
Oh, that's a bit unfair, not allowing to promote my own books. Actually, do you know, I've read a great, I just shared one that I've read recently, which I think is relevant to the conversation we've had, which is there's a book by the mathematician Hannah Fry, who actually spoke at an APM conference a few years ago. And it's called Hello World, How to Be Human in the Age of the Machine. And it was actually written back in 2019. But it's all about, it was in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and it's all about how data and AI is used. So this is almost kind of pre-pandemic. This was written, right? Just before the pandemic, this came out. But it's so relevant now. There's a great quote in the book as well where she's actually talking about whether AI, whether the robots are going to take over, and should we really be worried about that? And the quote is, yeah, that might happen, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. She says it's a bit like worrying about overcrowding on Mars. I love that. It might be a problem, but not for now. So Hannah Fry, Hello World: How to Be Human in the Age of the Machine.
Brilliant. Noted. Final one. Hopefully, let's keep it clean. What was your last ChatGPT question?
Oh, crikey! I'd have to actually have a look. It was probably something like, "Is it true that every 20 to 50 searches of ChatGPT takes the equivalent of a 500 milliliter bottle of water to cool the data center?" I don't think I got a straight answer out of it, to be fair.
Did it hallucinate? That's a good question. But look, Adam, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the podcast. It's been a privilege, and thank you for humoring us. Thank you for allowing us to ask, I guess, some of the questions that maybe listeners would be asking, and clarifying some of the things up as well. I know you're always open for discussion, so listeners, get in touch with Adam. He's active on LinkedIn. You know where to find him, the APM website. Before we let you go, though, Adam, I think you've got the APM Women in Project Management Conference coming up in London on the 26th. So that's in about a month's time. So we'll give a shout out for that as well. And folks, you can go to the website for that. But any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with before you sign off?
I would just say, if you know anybody who wants to join the profession, get them to join, because we're a really welcoming profession. I think actually, as far as social mobility goes, in terms of people from all kinds of backgrounds, it's a very easy profession to come into from a range of starting points. I think Val referred to that earlier on today. But actually, the kind of job satisfaction you get is second to none. So, and we need all these people, to deliver these projects. So, anybody who's listening, please encourage other people to join this wonderful profession.
Amazing stuff. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, it's great, Adam. I look forward. Hopefully, we can catch up in the UK end of the year at some point. But look, it's always good to have someone who challenges the status quo and just doesn't think outside the box, but also is complementary to your neighboring institutions, the PMIs and all that. Because I think you're right. There is something around just working together for the benefit of project professionals all around the globe. So thanks for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
There you have it, folks. This is the end of this episode. But please remember, if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest. He's a professor, doctor, I can't keep up, Adam Boddison, and thank you all for listening. Until next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and pay it forward.